What's up, guys? Welcome back to SPOOKTOBER21. Welcome to night 22, guys. We are kicking off our movie reviews. This is Project Potter. My name is Kyle, guys. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. Appreciate you guys stopping by. SPOOKTOBER21, guys, we're bringing you spooky content every single night. This is going to be a quick review. This is actually my first time watching Shining ever. So somehow I'm almost 30 years old and I have not seen this movie yet. So I'm very excited for this one because I have heard nothing but great things. I know it's an all-time classic. I have some thoughts on this movie for sure. We're going to spend a little time on the recap, but mostly it's going to be sort of my other reviews, guys. Favorite character, worst character, score out of 10. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, thanks for checking out the channel, guys. If you guys do like the content, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. Of course, go check out the other content that we have going right now. Basic premise of this movie, guys. Jack and his family, Wendy and his son, Danny, they go and Jack goes for an interview. I think he said it's a 3.5-hour drive to go take over this hotel. I think it's called the Overlook Hotel. And Jack is a former teacher and he's just looking for a fresh start. He's also a writer. And this reminded me a lot of Alan Wake because he's having like writer's block and he can't write. And so he goes to an interview with Mr. Ullman. There's this great sequence where the movie starts off and there's like a big overhead shot, and there were no drones back then. So this is like done by a helicopter, I'm assuming, but this really eerie, creepy music that is actually really good throughout the movie. It's like this high pitch. It's almost like a Halloween kind of, not the theme song, but like that like I don't know how to say it, but you guys know what I'm talking about. That high pitched eerie sound that just gets you like on edge. That's plays throughout the movie, and it's just like these beautiful shots of these roads and this landscape. This part I thought was done well. Jack goes in there, he's wearing a suit. Everyone's kind of moving out from the hotel, but it's really, really great. He goes in for the interview, and the acting is very well done here. And he tells them about, hey, this is the job. Just so you know, it's 5 months in isolation. He's like, we go from this time, he says like May to October or whatever, or I think they close October 30th, he says, and Jack is like, I don't understand. He's like, you think the slopes would be great here? And I forget what he says. He says like, yeah, but it's hard to get in the passes or whatever because we get snow. I don't know. But Jack is like, oh, okay, no problem. And the guy's like, are you sure? Because, a lot of people, this is 5 months of isolation. He's like, yeah, I don't know why he has to be here the whole time. I guess to take care of the building. The premise is a little weird, but he's like, oh yeah, no problem. He's like, how about your wife and kids? And he's like, oh, they'll love it. He's like, no problem. And he's like, oh, one more thing. The old caretaker, by the way, he murdered his 2 daughters. Not a big deal. He just happened to chop his daughters up, and I think his wife, in this hotel. So just went completely insane. But that's it. And Jack's like, oh, no problem. He's like, I definitely won't do that. And we're like, I think you are going to do that. Yeah, the whole movie, guys, is Jack's descent into madness. I will say one thing this movie does exceptionally well is the framing and the making the environment, the character. The hotel's main character here, Ullman takes them on like a nice tour, and it's great because we see all the people around there. It's revealed here that this hotel was built on an Indian burial ground. Of course, dude, because every horror story there's always an Indian burial ground, dude. Like as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, okay. There's something not right with this hotel. There's some evil afoot for sure. So yeah, the whole premise, guys, this hotel is kind of evil and it makes people go insane, or there's this power called the Shining, and there's the acting, let me say, with the exception of one that I'll get to later, is phenomenal across the board. It's really, really good. It's these older movies. This is a 1980 film. There's something about these older movies that like they spend a lot of time and sometimes too much time on certain shots, and but they do just an excellent job of just like showing you're really familiar with the hotel and the grounds, half hour into this movie. So it's just really good, but the acting has to stick out in my opinion because there's not a whole lot going on really. It's like, okay, here's the hotel, this is what's happening, and that's where the whole movie takes place, but the acting is really strong. So they meet the chef's name. I forget his name, but I'll put it in here. We'll just refer to him as the chef. And he's like, oh, let me take Danny on for some ice cream. And he calls him Doc. And then the wife, Wendy, is like, did you just call him Doc? And he's like, oh, I guess so. And he's like, how did you know we call him Doc? And he's like, oh, I must have just heard you say it. And she's like, but we haven't said it since we've been here. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, oh, I don't know, whatever. And then we find out when he goes to have ice cream with Danny that he has a power called the Shining as well. And he's like, hey, some people have it. He's like, I think he says some buildings have it. So I think the hotel sort of has it too. It's a really cool idea, honestly. It's kind of like these telepathic powers, but he's like, yeah, me and my grandmother had it. And he's like, we had whole conversations where we didn't even open our mouths. I was like, wow, that's terrifying and also very fascinating and cool at the same time. So, but that's basically what little Danny has, because at the beginning of the movie, Danny has this little finger, and that's his imaginary friend Tony, but we actually find out it's like a part of him. And that's like his power, the Shining, is that Tony is trying to like actually help them out throughout the movie. So yeah, the whole movie, guys, it starts out, it's all nice, and they love the hotel, and they're like having breakfast, and it's weird. Again, the idea of a caretaker for a building seems like outdated now, that they have to be there like every day for 5 months. I think it seems like now you would just turn the heat on for the pipes or whatever so they don't freeze, and then someone would just go check. Like it's a little weird, but I times were different then. There were no cell phones or anything like that back then. So which we see in this movie where like the lines are cut, and then they have to use like the radio, and then at the end Jack like cuts the radio. But I'm kind of jumping all over here, guys. But again, I don't want to spend too much time on the plot, although I say this every single review, and every single review I talk way too much about the plot. But this honestly should be a quicker review. The kid is weird. I mean, Danny is just a weird kid, but we find out that Tony is like his imaginary friend. He's kind of helping him, but he like holds his finger up every time, and he's like Tony doesn't, or he's like, Danny's not here right now. And I'm like, this isn't working for me. The chef also tells him like, hey, room 237. He's like, don't fucking go in there. And the kid's like, and he's like, Danny, don't go in there. And Danny's like, I think I'm going to go in there at some point. Eventually he's actually drawn there because Danny goes downstairs later on in the movie, guys. And he's like, collar's all messed up, and he's got like some marks, like he was like strangled, or like he's got some marks on his neck. There was a woman in the bathroom, and she tried to strangle me or whatever. I'm like, oh, shit, because they're supposed to be the only ones in the hotel for a long time. And we get time jumps where it says like Monday, Wednesday. The time jumps were a little weird because it was like 1 month later, and then it was like Monday, and then it was like Wednesday, then it was like 8 p.m. And I was like, these jumps are kind of strange. Like, but Stanley Kubrick is like, that's kind of his style. He's kind of innovative and crazy, and yeah, it's just a Kubrick film, really. But yeah, Jack just keeps going. And watching this before, so full disclosure, I watched a like explanation or like a review of this movie before recording this. So right after I finished the movie, went on YouTube, I watched like a 20-minute video, because there were a lot of points where I was like, oh, this is weird, or this doesn't make sense, or why is this happening? And we find out that Jack was an alcoholic before, and so when at the beginning of the movie, when Danny like blacks out, he sees the rush of blood coming through the hotel, and so Danny like blacks out, and so his mother Wendy freaks out, and she calls a doctor, and she goes to see, and she's like, oh, talking about Tony and all that stuff, and she's like, well, when did you meet Tony? And he's like, I don't know. And then they talk in the other room. So this is when Wendy reveals that Danny had an incident, and ever since then it's kind of been what's going on. And she's like, oh, what kind of incident? She's like, oh, he just got hurt, nothing major. And she's like, well, what kind of injury? And she's like, oh, he dislocated his shoulder. And she's like, how did he do that? And she's like, oh, it's just an accident. Jack came home one time and he was drunk, and the papers were everywhere. And so he went to go pull Danny away, and he used too much force and dislocated his shoulder. And the doctor is like, bro, that's fucked up. Like, she's looking at her like, this doesn't seem like, that's not something I mean, of course it could happen, but you have to use a lot of force to dislocate the shoulder. So we find out Jack is a drunk, and Jack is kind of selfish, and there's shades of that later on where Jack goes to the bar, and then we find out there are like spirits in the hotel, because he says like, hey, Lloyd, how have you been? Or he's like, busy night? And he's like, no, not at all. And he's like, let me get a drink and stuff. So that stuff is all really cool. Again, guys, I don't want to go scene by scene, because presumably if you're watching this review, you've seen this movie already. So, and there are other people out there that are doing a much better job of recapping this movie than I am. But this is kind of just, again, my quick thoughts on it. I will say, guys, so eventually Jack goes completely insane, chases in. There's a lot of classic scenes at the end, guys. Danny and Wendy escape, and Jack is left there with the shot of where he freezes, which honestly looks ridiculous. And I've seen it a million times on the internet, but I don't like that shot. I'm just going to go into some of my favorite scenes here, guys. Number one, I guess the framing of everything. There's a lot of like camera from the back, and it's like a wide view. Kubrick does an amazing job in this movie of telling you or showing you how big this place is, because like the way the camera pans in, you like it's usually focused on something in the center or something little, and then there's like these huge staircases or these huge hallways, or like it just feels very, very big and like mysterious and awesome, and like it's like no pun intended, there's like a maze when there's a literal maze outside, but it's like you can get lost in there easily, and it's a hotel, but it's huge, and it's just beautiful, and it's like all these shots, I was looking at it and I was like looking at every little detail, and I was like looking for things that don't belong and stuff like that. Like it had me as an eagle-eyed viewer really, really interested in that. That's awesome. There's some shots that I've seen like on the internet before, parts of where like when Danny's on the bike and the camera's behind him, that's really, really cool because he's going around each corner and you're looking, especially because he's seen the Grady twins a couple times, the two girls that were murdered by the previous caretaker. He's seen them a couple times now, and so you're looking for like what's wrong. And then there's like a scene where he stops and he looks at 237 and he like gets up and he actually tries to go in there. The door is locked, and so I'm like, interesting. Later on, he goes in there. There's a great scene where Danny's playing with his toys or whatever on the rug, and then a tennis ball comes in, and then he looks up and no one's in the hallway, and I'm like, oh shit. And he's like, mom, and she's obviously nowhere near there, and that's when 237 is open. So he goes in there, and then that's when he goes downstairs. Wendy actually accuses Jack, as he's being kind of deranged, Wendy accuses Jack of like hurting his neck or strangling him a little bit, and Jack is like all fucked up, so he can't like defend himself. He doesn't know what's going on there. But yeah, again, I'm going a little out of order, guys, but that was awesome. Obviously the scene behind me that here's Johnny when he's just completely lost his mind at the end is great, where he's got the axe, he's going through the different doors there, and then just Jack Nicholson puts on just a legendary performance, just incredible acting where he just loses his damn mind, and his facial expressions, so many great expressions, and just the way he like acts is great. I'll get into more of that in just a bit here, guys. But yeah, all the shots behind them, a lot of it are these same shots. Like we visit the typewriter room a lot, but that's beautiful. And then like just how it changes and it slowly pans around. And I just loved how behind any corner something crazy could be happening. So, and then obviously at the end when there's like these visions where he sees like the guy with the head that's bleeding, and there's like a full-on ball going on, all that stuff. So I'm not going to recap everyone, guys, but yeah, I'm sure there's scenes that I'm forgetting in here, but I just thought it was just a well shot movie, and just really well done. So some of the worst scenes, guys, and this kind of will go into sort of my overall feelings of the film. The bathtub scene where there's a really attractive young woman. Jack goes up there and he actually sees a really hot young naked woman, and he goes up there and he starts like making out with her, and he looks in the mirror and it's like a really old lady, and it turns out she's actually drowned herself in a tub. We find out later that I guess this was someone that stayed there. This is one of the spirits. She stayed there and she killed herself in the bathtub because her boyfriend or whatever ran off and left her stranded there. This was weird. This was a very cool idea, but so when Danny comes down and then Wendy tells Jack that there was a woman that tried to strangle him in the bathtub, I was like, that's awesome, dude. I was like, I got like chills. I was like, that's really creepy. And then he goes up there, and then just when she sees her, I'm like, oh, I don't want to actually see her. And it's obviously like an attractive woman. And then it turns into the old lady, but she's like gross looking, and she's like kind of like a zombie, but also just like mostly human. But she's like, there's like this slow, like, when she's like, and she's like chasing him, and I was like, we don't need this, dude. It's like one of those things where like the theory or the mystery or the idea of that way scarier than the execution. One scene I didn't like, I would say, at the end is when the chef, like, he flies like 5 hours or whatever, then drives like another 3. He like leaves, and then he gets through the shining power with Danny. Danny reaches out to him for help basically, and so he finally has to like work his way all the way back at this special snow truck to get back to the hotel, because he says like, oh, the people here are actually assholes or something. And I was like, okay, that seems a little weird. But he comes all the way back. He spends like the whole second half of the movie getting back there, right? And he's like calling the radio station. He's like, can you please check on them? And they're like, okay, the lines are dead. The storm is causing all these lines to be dead, but, we'll radio in. And he's like, oh, they must have disconnected their radio or whatever. And he's like, all right, I'll just drive up there. He finally gets there. He's literally in there for 2 seconds. And of course, Jack comes out with an axe, and he gets an axe to the heart, like a fatal axe blow. And I was like, come on, man. Like, all of that work, and then Jack just takes him down. And I was like, I know it's like wrong place, wrong time, but that seems weird to me. There's a scene which was actually creepy because it was so weird, and I was just like, what the fuck? I don't know if this has ever been explained. There's like a blowjob scene where Wendy goes up and she's running away from Jack or whatever, and she goes up and she just looks, and there's just a gentleman someone getting sucked off, and there's a person in a bear costume, and there's like, and they look at him, and it's like hilarious, but also terrifying because it's so weird and creepy. But so I like laughed, and I was like, oh, I don't like that. But that's like never explained. And it was so random. And I was like, what the hell is going on here, dude? That scene was weird, but again, kind of so outrageous that it's funny. So it's like, you just see that scene, like, what the hell's going on? I'm sure there's other stuff, but there's just a few scenes that they're on it way too long. When Danny first sees the 2 Grady girls, when he's throwing darts, there's like a really hilariously bad zoom in, where it's like, and it zooms in. I thought that Danny, for the most part, kind of was distracting in the point. I mean, it's a child actor, so I know that's hard to do. I thought he was distracting with a lot of his stuff. He was really annoying, dude. When like saying red rum, I was like, okay, like I get it. It's kind of creepy, but then he would just. It was a weird, like, he was trying to do like a demonic voice, but clearly he was too young to do that. So it was just sounded like kind of like a froggy voice. And it was just weird. They hung on the things too long. But yeah, those are the only ones off the top of my head. But there are just a few scenes where I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like, I don't know how I feel about this, but it was, I guess, a little few and far between. Okay, guys, so I feel like I've rambled more than most, or more than my older. I feel like this is a much messier review, but whatever, we're going with it. This is not a movie I'm familiar with. It's a one-time watch for me, so I might be a little rusty in my review here. But we're going to go over to my favorite character, guys. Is it anyone else but Jack? Jack Nicholson, and of course his character's name is Jack too. An all-time performance. Some of the scenes are well, let me back up. He's not a perfect character. There are definite flaws in his character. He is not a very likable character. I think we confuse the actor Jack Nicholson, who's so likable and his acting is so good, that we almost confuse that for like almost like an anti-hero with Jack Torrance, who is just kind of an asshole in this movie. Knowing that the hotel kind of warped his mind, or the evil spirits in the hotel are forcing him or like pushing him to kill his family, makes a lot more sense, because when I was watching this film without that context, I was like, okay, so why are you going fucking nuts? Like, I understand. I was like, okay, well, the guy did tell him, like, 5 months of isolation, like, it could really drive a man crazy. And he's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. And I was like, okay. But then it wasn't really like a slow descent into madness. He was just kind of like, he would just snap. He would be talking to Wendy, and then she would say something, and he would be like, you're fucking ruining my life. And I was like, whoa, dude, why are you being an asshole? Like, he's being such a dick. Like, when she goes in and talks to him, when he does the typewriter, and we find out later on, which is a really creepy scene that where he types, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And that's the only fucking sentence he's written on every paper. And Wendy has the horrifying realization where she goes through the pages, like pages and pages that he's typewritten, and it says the same fucking sentence on all of them in like different paragraph formats. And it's like, oh, dude. So he's just lost his fucking mind. And so she hasn't been going in there to check on his work because he said, don't fucking come in here when I'm working. And so she said, okay. And she finally goes in there and she's like, oh my God, dude, he's been writing the same sentence for like months. And it's just like, oh, like that's when she knows he's completely lost his mind. And because that's when she has the bat and stuff. And he comes up, he's like, do you like it? And then she's like, oh my God. And she hits him with the bat. Jack was, although unlikable, you gotta just tip your cap, dude, because he's just, his facial expressions alone, like, could win awards. And so, yeah, it's like, I mean, he just does a great job. And Jack easily is so deranged and dark. And the only thing I didn't love, like I said, is that he just went from like pretty normal at the very beginning and a nice guy to just like a fucking sociopath. But I guess that is explained by the evil spirit. So, but the first time I was like, this movie's kind of weird and I don't understand. Like when he's going through the hall, there's so many scenes where he's like in the hallway and he's like, and he's just like doing movements. And I was like, this is cool, but also what the fuck are you doing? Like what led you to that? But the spirits and there being like a mysticism and being it on Indio burial ground, I think makes a lot more sense. Okay, guys, and that brings us to our worst character. And let me tell you, by a mile, it is Wendy Torrance. This woman, all due respect to the actress, one of the worst performances I've ever seen in a movie. She was so bad, so overacted. All of her facial expressions were like way over the top, where I was like, okay, dude. She was like running weird, where she was like just all of her line delivery I think was really weird. She also felt like a very dumb character where like she didn't seem very intelligent. She was asking all these questions. And so when Jack is getting like frustrated at her, I was getting a little frustrated too, where I was like, dude, like she just didn't seem to be very intelligent at all. And so it's kind of like, I don't know. It was just weird. And I just didn't think she delivered her lines very well. I thought she was very annoying, or like she was taking me out of it, where there were a couple of really good scenes and then she would say something or act a certain way, and I would be like, oh, okay. Like I would just like either laugh or just be like, this is horrible. Like you're doing a horrible job acting. So all due respect to that actress, I'm sure she's a wonderful person. I don't know if she's still alive. I didn't look that up because this was a 1980 movie, but she looked really young, so I'm sure she hopefully is. Hopefully she's had a very fulfilling life, but she just stood out to me like a sore thumb, where she was, I think, easily the worst part of this film. Okay, guys, that brings me to a score. So this movie is tricky because there are times where I think this movie is absolutely brilliant and incredible and amazing, and I can see why it gets so much praise. There are also times where I was like, there's a few scenes where I'm like, this is either going on way too long, or this is not needed, or this is just weird. Bear blowjob scene aside, dude, I was just like, there's a lot of times where I'm just like, man, this is a strange, the bathtub scene, so weird with the old lady. I was like, we don't need this, and I was expecting something really creepy to be in there. And then for it to be this, just like this weird effect, I was like, I don't know. There's just other scenes too where we were spending a lot of time on certain scenes, and some of the time I feel like that really works, where the dialogue is great, and some of the time I was like, we could have cut out like a good portion of this film. And I think if they had a tighter package, this is almost a 2.5 hour movie. I think if it was like maybe just under 2 hours instead, it would have been a much better product. With that being said, guys, I mean, there are certain things that will stick with me probably for a long time, but I've seen better horror movies, and I appreciate that this is a 1980 film and it still looks great, but I have to give this one I don't know. I can't even decide on a score. I have to give this one an 8.3. And the only reason that is so high is because I absolutely love the tone and the environment, and the hotel is, I said Jack Nicholson was the best actor or the best character, but honestly, the hotel itself, I think, and the way it's shot has got to be that. So we're not going to change anything there. But like, part of me is like, yeah, some of this movie is very forgettable, but the parts that stick out, I'm like, okay. And I was invested the whole time. Like I was interested, and I was like, the parts that were creepy or the parts that were scary, the mystery that was building, I was on the edge of my seat. Now, there were things that took me out of this movie for sure, but I think the good outweighs the bad. And then there's just a few things that I'm like, this is kind of weird. And you don't ever want to be pulled out of the Matrix like that. But I think there is enough where I'm like, wow, this is awesome, or this is great, or this is really creepy, or like something you just feel kind of off the whole movie, like something is wrong. So I think they do a really good job of that. So with that being said, this movie, albeit it has a lot of flaws, I think there's a lot that it does well. And it's one of those movies where I think I'll think about it a lot longer after it's done. And then I like to like go on like Reddit or go on different threads and see the theories and all these things. So I definitely enjoyed it, but it was far from perfect, I think, in my opinion. Okay, guys, well, that is another nice Spooktober 2021. This is night 22, and I know I said this would be a short review, but I can feel already that this was not a very short review, and this one was kind of messy all over the place. But I appreciate you guys stopping by. Thanks for checking out Project Potter. Thanks for checking out Spooktober 21. We will be back tomorrow night, guys, for another movie review. What movie will it be? You'll have to tune in tomorrow night to find out. But either way, guys, appreciate you, and stay spooky.